friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Summer Friends, all the speech bubbles, and flamingo together. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on Catherine Pooler Favorite White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my pineapple, and I pulled out Y13 and Y15 and added in Y28 to give it a little bit more of a beige brown tone, although I quickly realized that I was going to need a transition shade from that into the warmer yellows, so I also added in Y26. Then I blended out with the Y15 and filled in with the Y13. Then I'll move on to my strawberry, and I'll use R22, R24, and R29. I'm going to place my R29 along the bottom edge and blend up toward the top with the R24, and then I'll fill in with the R22, just coloring carefully around that cap, which we will come back to later. Once I'm done with that, we'll move on to the watermelon, and I'm actually going to keep the R24 and the R22. I'll take away the R29 and add in the R20. So I'm going to take that R24 and put that down at the bottom for my darkest, and then I'll blend toward the center in that kind of semicircle shape with the R22 for my midtone. And then I'll take that R20 and fill in the area around the face, just making sure to go over the edge of that R22 so I get a nice smooth transition. Then I will take those same shades and add a little wedge to my umbrella, which I forgot to do with my yellows, so I'll have to come back to that later on. I'm going to move on to my greenery, and I'm going to use G20, G21, G24, and G28. Mainly I'm only using the darkest three shades there. I'll only bring in that G20 at the end. So I'm starting with that G28, laying in a bit of darkness with that on the top of the pineapple and the strawberry, and then also doing the watermelon rind. And then I'm going to blend that out with the G24, again making sure to go over the edge of that G28 because it is such a dark shade, and I'm kind of pulling that darker color into the midtone to help it blend. And then I'm going to fill that in with the G21. I'll do the same for my watermelon. And then I'll take that G20 and add that to the thin little sliver between the green and the red. I just wanted to have like a little bit of a greenish tint to that white area. And then I'll also do another section of the umbrella. And then once that's had a chance to dry, I'm going to go back in and do a few little stripes with that G28 on the watermelon, and just carefully blend out the edges of that with the G24. Moving on to my coconut, I'm going to use E43, E44, and E47 for the outer portion, the husk of the coconut. So I'm starting with the E47 on those outside edges, and then I'll blend in with the E44. And I'm stopping just shy of the eyes. I want to make sure that the area that goes over the eyes is the lightest shade so that his features don't get too lost in there. So I'll use that G43 to fill in the center. And then I am going to use some more G40s for the inner part of the coconut. I'm going to use E40 and E41. And just add a little bit of color to the inner part and then on the outside edges, and I left a lot of it just the plain white cardstock. I'm going to go back to my yellow tones like I mentioned, just using the Y13, Y15, and Y26 for that other section of the umbrella. And then for the rosy cheeks, I wanted to go with some cool toned since my strawberry and watermelon already use my warm tone reds that I would normally use for blush. So I used RV11 and RV13. My RV13 is often leaky and it felt like it was about to. So I just pulled off the other cap to equalize the pressure in the barrel. But I realized that on some of these, the RV13 wasn't quite dark enough and it wasn't going to show. It's not really going to show up on the strawberry no matter what, but I did want to make it a little bit darker on the rest of the fruit. So I brought in RV14 as well. I did add it to the strawberry, but just because he's so bright red, it just really kind of blends in with the rest of him. I did take that RV14 and add a few little stripes to my straw. And then I'm going to go back to that E41 and just outline the edges of all of my speech bubbles to make those stand out a bit. I thought about doing them in a pale aqua, but I decided not to introduce any more colors into this palette and just use something that I had already used in my coloring. So that's how I went back to the E41. It's a subtle color, but I think it does add a little something that helps those speech bubbles pop on the scene. And then I'm going to grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen, get that going off to the side until it's flowing nicely, and I'll go over the eyes of my coconut. That's also going to help them stand out a bit better. And then I'm going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. Next, I'm going to take the 4-square backdrop portrait and die cut that out of some black licorice cardstock. I'm going to pop out those center squares, but I am going to save those for later on. And then I'm going to go to the brand new Gleeful Gradients 6x6 pad, and I'm going to find the page that kind of looks like a sunset, and I will tear that out of the pad. I'll put that behind the 4-square backdrop and kind of figure out where I want to trim that down so I get a nice little sunset gradient. And then I'm going to pop this piece in my MISTI. I'm going to use the 4-square backdrop as a kind of template as I lay out my stamps. And this is where I'm bringing in the stamps from the flamingo together. I'm going to use the palm tree trunks and the palm tree tops, and I'm going to add a large and a small palm tree into each of these 4 squares. So I'm just going to keep adjusting and checking that I have them lined up correctly. So I'll have the stems on first, and then I'll add the tops, and I'll just move the stems to the next square so I can stamp them at the same time as I do the tops for the previous square. So I'm just going to work my way across, and I am flipping those chunks upside down on some of these because they actually both go the same direction. They both bend toward the right, and I wanted them to come in from either side. So I'm just flipping them upside down and switching it so that there is a tall one and a short one in each little square, but that it reverses into the next square, if that makes sense. So we don't have like all the short ones on the left and all the tall ones on the right. I wanted to have a mixture there. So I have one more set of palm tree tops to stamp, and I did everything twice. That's just how I like to do it, to make sure it's nice, bold, and black. And I think those silhouetted palm trees against the sunset look so cool. Then I'll pop the rest of the cardstock from my coloring into my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp a tiny sentiment from the All the Speech Bubbles stamp set. And I am masking off the word, I think it was best. You're the best is what I think it said. But I just wanted the you're the, and so I'm masking off that final word and stamping that out. And then I'm also going to do an insert for the inside of my card since I am using black cardstock for my card base. So I did this other little drink and the cheers to you and stamped that in Peachy Keen ink. And then I added a little face and a speech bubble as well and just stamped those down. And now I need to work on the rest of my sentiment. So I'm taking a piece of guava cardstock and I am taping on my Finley's ABC's alphabet dies, and I'm going to spell out the word coolest. I'm going to have to do the O twice because I need 2 of those, but I'll run these through my die cutting machine after I just hold them in place with a little bit of post-it tape to make sure they don't shift, and then I'm left with all of these little die cut letters. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm going to take that insert and glue that to the inside of the card. And I did trim that down just slightly so that we have a nice border of that black cardstock showing on all 4 sides. I think that frames it up nicely. And then to the front, I'm going to add my pattern paper, which I stamped on. So I'll just glue that down on top, making sure it's on there nice and straight. And then I'm going to grab that 4 square backdrop portrait, and I lined the back of that with some thin strips of Scotch 3M foam tape so that it could be really well supported and just add a bit of dimension to this card. So once I have all of those release papers pulled off, I'm going to line that up with the 4 corners, make sure it's on there straight, and then press that down into place. So I took those 4 little squares that came out from the centers of the die cut, and I trimmed those down with the sandy beach accents. The longer ones were the perfect size to trim these down, and I just used a variety of them so I would have some different slopes to my little sand dunes. And I am popping those up on some foam tape and just adding those down at the bottom to cover the space that is left behind between the palm tree trunks and the bottom of the square. And then I can bring in my images. I've also added some foam tape to anything that will land above the little sand dunes. And then below the sand dunes, I'm going to add some liquid glue. And I'm just making sure that I have the right sentiment for each of these little fruits and drinks. I stamped one for each one to go along with it. There's a variety to choose from in that Summer Friends stamp set, but I chose the ones that kind of went along with it naturally, like the berry happy for the strawberry. And then next to the strawberry, I'm going to place the pineapple. So I'm just making sure that I leave enough room beside them for that speech bubble. And I'm trying not to cover up too much of the palm trees. Some of it is going to get covered up, like in the case of this one, just because that pineapple is a little bit taller than some of the other fruit. But that's okay. You can kind of still see because of the trunk behind and just from the rest of the frames that there is supposed to be a palm tree there. Then I'm going to place the watermelon in the bottom right corner so that we have the 2 kind of reddish fruits in opposite corners. And I'll go ahead and add the coordinating sentiment above that and to the right. And then in my last square, my bottom left square, I'm going to add the little coconut drink. And then I'll have the sentiment behind him. It's going to go behind his straw because that's the only way to make them fit together there. And I added just a touch too much foam tape there because it needed to overlap the edge of the frame. So I just tore off a little bit of that and added some liquid glue instead. And luckily that sentiment fit perfectly there with the straw just kind of jutting into the speech bubble but not covering up any part of the words. And then I'm going to take my letters and spell out the word coolest so I can figure out the placement. It is going to be a tight fit, but it will fit. So I'm just kind of laying those out and making sure I have them just where I want them. And then I'm going to start picking those up with my EK Success reverse tweezers and adding my Barely Art Precision Craft glue to the back and then just setting them back down into place. So I'll start working my way backwards from right to left, just picking those up and placing them down as close as I can together without them actually touching. And using the EK Success reverse tweezers just helps me keep my fingers out of that glue, especially since I'm working on black cardstock. I do need to be careful with my placement because any little smears of glue are probably going to show. And using that Barely Art Precision Craft Glue as well, which is a lifesaver for projects like this, because it has that super fine nozzle which allows me to get that glue behind there without too much seepage, as long as I don't press too hard as I'm squeezing out the glue. But no, I was being really careful with the amount that I was laying down there. So I'm on to my last letter, that C, and then I'll just do any final adjustments quickly before that glue is completely dry. Again, just using those tweezers to help me slightly adjust things as needed. And then I'll just take that little sentiment strip, which I just trimmed down with my scissors, and I'm going to glue that above the 2 O's in the word coolest. This card just reminds me so much of like my teenage years. It takes me back to the late 80s and 90s and the TV show Miami Vice and all of that, with just kind of like the neon sunset colors and the sunglasses. I don't know, it just kind of took me back for a little bit. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I am going to add a little bit of Stardust Stickles to each of my fruits. I'm kind of wiping a little bit of it away with my fingers because I didn't want to cover up their faces or their details like their sunglasses. But I also am going to add it to the bottom edge of each of the letters, just going up maybe like a quarter of the way and keeping it consistent across all of them. And that is going to finish this one up. So I will lift that up to the camera so you can see it in a bit more detail. Hopefully catch some of that flash of the sparkle and shine and give you another peek at the inside. If you enjoyed this one, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All the products I used will be listed and linked in the description bar below the video in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in the next. Bye-bye!